Greetings, Ship Familia. Welcome back to the latinXfactor Sharpening Your Professional Edge program. I'm Dr. Dora Renaud, Senior Director of Academic Programs for SHIP National. Tonight is our 9th webinar. We have Ace the Interview and Land the Job, which focuses on how you can learn from experts about what to do and what not to do to make a positive, lasting impression. We are so excited to welcome the Accenture team. They are the SHIP Star Award winners for Company of the Year for demonstrating significant, measurable, and visible assistance to further SHIP's programs. We have 3 of the team members with us tonight: Ilenia, Herrera, Lutz, Leticia Corona, and Nick Tempestini. Ilenia is an associate manager with Accenture's talent acquisition organization. In her 14 years at Accenture, Ilenia has enjoyed a diverse career in the consulting and human resources field. She oversees the strategic direction and execution of entry-level diversity recruiting efforts at Accenture, and as the Campus I&D Recruiting Lead. Ilenia combines her excitement for finding the best talent with her focus on the professional development of underrepresented minorities. Leticia is a management consultant with Accenture's Health and Public Service Talent and Organization Practice, where her focus is to help Accenture clients think through the massive digitally driven changes coming to the workplace and what it means for how they manage their organization, talent, and remain relevant. Most recently, she led all recruiting efforts for all of Puerto Rico and supported Ilenia with SHIP recruiting efforts for 2 years. And last but not least, Nicholas Tempestini is the managing director within Accenture Digital Practice. In his current role with Accenture Google Business Group, Nick is responsible for the global capability enablement of solution architects, delivery and technical architects, and global cloud platform. Nick has been with Accenture for 22 years and is currently the executive sponsor for Puerto Rico University's campus recruiting, as well as the executive sponsor for SHIP at Accenture. So without further ado, I'll pass over the mic to our featured Accenture speakers.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dora. I hope you guys can hear me well. I'm actually, you caught me this week down in Puerto Rico. So you can call me the hurricane hunter in that sense. I'm happy to say that most of us, I would say, are okay. The storm has passed. No major damage has been reported in the mainland. We're still waiting for the smaller islands to the east of Fajardo. But here in the San Juan metro area, I have to say that we're okay. We have electricity. We haven't had any rain, very minor wind. So we're doing really well. And it happens also to be that the reason I came down here was because it's my dad's birthday, actually today. But as you can see, I committed to the SHIP webinar, and I'm really excited to be here. Today, we have a really exciting topic to talk about, acing the interview and landing the job. And I have to say, we're very lucky to have Ilenia. She has been involved in recruiting for what, Ilenia, 12, 15 years? I always miss my numbers.
Let's not remember the numbers. It's just a number.
We've been working together for over a decade. And I have to say, we combined, we have over 25 years of recruiting experience that we hope to share with you so you can truly ace the interview and land a job. With that being said, Ilenia, actually, Leticia, can we move on to the third slide of the presentation?
And Nick, first of all, I'm so happy that our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters are okay, and that this was a storm. I know here at Accenture we've been monitoring. It's been a topic of conversation all day, and people checking how are people in Puerto Rico and all that. So glad to hear that. Well, and hopefully that just satisfies your love for adrenaline rush, Nick.
It sure does. It sure does. So I think we're having a technical difficulty with the presentation, but Ilenia, do you want to go ahead and get started based on the agenda we had?
Yes, absolutely. I think we want to focus first and kind of making sure that you guys have the right mindset. I think kind of where we're starting in here, you got in, you get the interview, and I think what comes after that is the reality is that the interview starts way before your actual appointment. Some of it is your own preparation, some of it is your interactions with people, and that I think what we want to make sure is that you have the right mindset in kind of getting ready for this interview. Nick, do you just kind of want me to give kind of my recommendations
Well, I
along with
think
that, or?
the four areas, the three areas that I want to talk about today, right? I think it's very key that we set the level stage, right? Essentially, you've been given a ticket. You're invited to the interview. What's next? And a couple of things that I like to work through with you, Ilenia, is what are the things that the candidates need to do to prepare themselves for that interview, right? And then we can talk about later on, how do you prepare your mindset? What are the things that you do? And then it's showtime, right? Interview day. What do you do? What should you expect? How can you prepare for the different types of interviews? And we can walk through some of the different types of interviews so that the candidates are aware. Because we don't want to give only the perspective of what Accenture does, but we want to give what the market typically does. And we've seen variations of how recruiting is handled by different companies. There's different flavors of interviews, and the process can be slightly different across companies, but at the end of the day, the objective is the same, right? It's trying to identify top talent to meet the needs of the business.
Yep. So let's enter that. And what our audience should expect from us is probably a dialogue. Nick and I kind of take turns with things, a lot of things, and because of kind of working so organically together. I think first things first, be clear what is the agenda and the types of interviews that the organization is hosting. Like Nick said, there's a number of interviews that everybody does, the behavioral, the case, etc. But every company obviously tailors that interview to the skills that they are looking for this role. So gain clarity, number one, of what is the various and how many assessments and what are the incarnations of assessment. It's very different to prepare for a one-on-one interview versus a group interview. So I would start with that. And every organization, I'm sure, it's very detailed and kind of preparing you with that. Take advantage of any prep calls that an organization does, whether they're in person or virtually. And if you can't attend because you have a conflict, be sure to keep that communication going with your recruiter. Again, it's that concept that your interview starts before the interview. And I can tell you, when we host ours, I do notice the students, and there's people that I can tell already most likely they're going to do great in the interviews because of the caliber of the questions that they're asking in these sessions. And then very importantly is your mindset in preparing about understanding what is it the company does. Are you able to articulate it? Do you understand? Most companies are in the business to sell products, services, or a combination of products and services, right? So are you able to articulate that? And what are the things that in social media or through the representatives or through their company website do they show that they value? What is their mission, their goals, and the storytelling that they are sharing in terms of their priorities? Every organization has very specific language how they share that. And to me, I find the best information about companies, I feel, in LinkedIn. Of all the social media platforms, I think the most robust updates in terms of company latest news, their key players, their offerings, right? Offerings in regards to a company is that it's just exactly that. What are the products, services, or combination of products and services that they provide to their customers? So those are my immediate tips, Nick.
And Ilenia,
What did I leave out?
You hit it right on the spot, right? Because as an interviewer, I sit back, and when I get the candidate, sitting in front of me, I cannot find it. I couldn't help but notice when they come knowing what we do. And when a candidate sits down in an interview and I ask them, so what do you know about Accenture? And I see the, deer in the headlights, it's like, oh my God, what kind of question did I ask them? And I know what kind of answer I'm gonna get. It sometimes can be disappointing because if you're interested in working for my company, I want you to know, I want to know that you did the research of finding out, what we do, what is it that we do. And you can ask additional clarifying questions because I'm not expecting you to know everything, right? And that's how you can actually start a dialogue. And guess what? That's actually part of the interview. Now, one of the things that I like to do is, let's take a step back because even before you reach interview day, right? Someone from a representative from the company has done the vetting of your resume, right? Has done the vetting of the resume that you have submitted. Either it was at a career fair to a recruiter, or it was because they came across in a database that SHPE has provided, or any other mechanism or any other channel has provided to the company. They vetted that one, hey, your GPA is listed. Make sure you list your GPA because that question will come up. They vetted that you have the work experience, that you have some of the leadership or volunteer opportunities, and based on that they say, okay, you know what, let's give this person the ticket for the ride. And then it's like a roller coaster from the candidate's perspective, right? Because from the moment you get invited to the moment you are sitting in front, it's like ups and highs. You get really high adrenaline because you've been invited. Then when it starts settling, you start getting worried about, oh my God, I need to practice, I need to learn. I don't know how to do a case study. I don't know what a behavioral interview is. And then you start getting practice, you start getting pumped up, the adrenaline, the boom boom in your heartbeat starts accelerating. It's interview day, you're nervous, all these things are happening. And that's that kind of that mindset that we'll talk about later that you need to prepare. But the key thing is, whether it's a career fair or it's through a job fair that the company came with your resume, the moment that resume lands on a recruiter's hands, the interview has started.
Yep.
Right? Whether you're there in person or not, the interview has started. Your resume is your first point. And from there on, the interview process has started. The next stage is typically the conversation, whether it's one-on-one at a career fair, or it's someone calling you and telling you, hey, we're interested in learning more about you. We'd like to invite you for an interview. Right there, even the recruiter is doing the interview with you. Because guess what happens? If you're rude to the recruiter, if you don't respond in time to the recruiter,
don't read the emails with the logistics.
Right. If you don't arrive on time, all of that gets taken into consideration and builds up to that whole interview experience, right? And obviously, we want to make sure that as a candidate, it's your brand that you're putting out there, right? Your resume is your first physical attribute of your brand. And then from there on, you are representing your own brand, and you are creating this brand, and you are creating all these impressions with everything you do from the moment you've dropped off or someone has access to your resume. So,
yeah.
With that being said, Ilenia, I'd like to take a break maybe right now, and maybe Dora, can we do the first poll? I want to get a kind of an idea from the audience with regards to one of our questions, right? We're talking about making the impression and connecting with that. And I think that was one of the questions, right? Dora, do we still have you?
Yep. Do you want to do the true false interviewers decide on the candidate within 10 to 15 seconds? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
please.
All right, we're launching the poll. And we have 20% that have voted. And it's still going. We're at 60%. We're at 80%.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. 85, and it's slowing down a little bit. We're at 90%. So I think we'll go ahead and close the polls.
Sounds good. So how are we looking at the results?
All right, we have 78% say it's true and 22% say it's false.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's actually great to hear that. Most of you think that the interviewer decide on a candidate within 10, 15 seconds. And yes, that is a true fact. It's been proven over and over through statistics that whether it's the person you meet at the career fair, right, at the booth, or the person you meet at the workshop, or even the person who's going to interview you eventually, those individuals within the first 10 to 15 seconds have made the decision of whether they're going to allow you to pass on to the next stage or not. It's incredible. It's incredible. And this is a fact. Now, obviously, there's a process that we have, right, which is called the interview. There's a process which is called the vetting. And essentially, the rest of the 45 minutes in that interview is essentially to make sure that the impression that they had in the first 10, 15 seconds was the right one. Sometimes the impressions can be wrong, and it's happened to me multiple times. I come in, I see the candidate, I'm like, I'm gonna pass them, and then they bomb the interview. Or I've seen a case where the first 10, 15 seconds, it's like, I don't like this person. I don't get to, I didn't feel a connection. But then when we do the interview, oh my God, it was like night and day. They were on. They brought their game and they really aced the interview. So that can happen, but the majority of the times, believe me, within the 10, 15 seconds, we know whether, the interviewer will know whether they like that candidate or not. And the rest of the interview will be to validate that assumption.
And, just to kind of wrap up some of these components that the interview starts before, when you think about it, this is kind of where your readiness in terms of your elevator speech comes in, right? When you start the interview and you have those first few minutes of the conversation to establish rapport. I mean, things like, for example, understanding the social styles, right? And your ability to use your emotional intelligence to figure out, okay, this person is very analytical, very serious. Is this person and expressive, right? There's some people that like to get to know you a little bit before getting to start, on the business. So this is kind of what, that correct mindset. So as we talked about, let's just kind of summarize it, Nick. Right. Obviously, you in your preparation of your company research, understanding the position, the company culture, values, etc. Then, from your own standpoint, having that emotional intelligence of hopefully having studied the social styles or something similar, of having that elevator speech, very polished in terms of your introductions, your professional presence. Like Nick said, there's really no excuse for not knowing these things with all the resources that are available. And the most important thing, it's really to practice. It could be maybe you in front of a mirror, have friends who are more seasoned in their job search or that have interviews for companies that you're interested in, to give you that feedback of how it's coming across. And you all can probably relate to the last thing that I'll say, right? I remember interviewing for an internship or my senior year. I kind of was shaky and rusty in the first one or two interviews. And the more you get to it, right, you polish your style, your comfort zone, or you get less, anxious, right? So the practice element is really important. But Nick,
Indeed.
yeah, I'm sorry.
And I'm sorry, one thing I want to add also is, as you're like, once you get invited, right, you have a recruiter that is typically assigned to you. And that recruiter, whether it's Accenture or any other company, you typically have a recruiter that will guide you through the process. Leverage that recruiter. that recruiter will know how the process works, will know the type of interview. Many times they will also know who the interviewer is, right? Now, sometimes they don't know because the interviewer may not get assigned until last minute, but most of the time they'll know who the interviewer would be. And you can ask them questions. How is that interviewer? What is that person's role and position? What should I expect about the interview? How should I come dressed? What's the location, logistics? Are there any ways to prepare for a particular interview? Right? So make sure you inquire about the interview, because the more you know about what's going to come up next, the better you'll be in preparing for that interview. And then kind of like what Ilenia said is, you got to practice. You got to practice, and guess what? It's got to be more practice, right? Especially when it comes to case studies. Case studies are very challenging. We'll talk about that more later on. But you have to prepare, whether it's a behavioral interview, understand what kind of questions to be asked, to a case study, be prepared to other types of interviews, be aware of what they are. And I think this is a great segue to the slide that we're showing up right now, which is preparing your mindset, right? Now that you know you got invited, now that you know what the company you're going to be interviewing with, who the interviewer with, what type of interview you'll have, now we can talk about, okay, these are the different types of interviews. So Ilenia, can you walk us through, there's dozens of types of interviews, but I think we can probably focus on the top 3 or 4 that are primarily used in the industry, and then we can and talk more
So
about.
across industry, I think the most common interview that is used is behavioral interviews or situational, and those are the ones that we are all very familiar with. Of tell me about a time when you had a situation, and those tend to really focus on 3 factors: teamwork, a learning curve kind of situation, and a time sort of constraint. I think when you look at all the questions across the board, it's either a people problem, a time management situation, or how to quickly learn or complete an activity. And that one requires a little bit of introspection in terms of what I will do an inventory of all the significant projects you've done, whether it's at your summer internship or your co-op, or whatever other works experiences, or leadership, right? I mean, companies want to see what is there more to you than just your academics. So whether it's philanthropy, whether it's SHPE, whether it's Greek organizations, whether it's giving back, mentoring, and obviously most organizations value any sort of part-time or any kind of work experiences that show that you're able to balance a number of responsibilities at once. The best way to handle a situational interviews is using the STAR system. So you have a basically point A to a situation, an action. I'm missing a couple of the letters, but basically a situation, I forget what the T is, the action, and then the results. And basically how to organize your thought process is have your situations identified, work in a 2-minute summary in which you explain the situation. So in that summary, you can share the context, you can share what the challenges were, you can sort of mention in a bullet point manner the specific actions that you took to impact or remedy that situation, and then you share the results. And walking through that takes practice, because after summarizing a situation in 2 minutes is not necessarily come natural to most people, especially us Latinos, that we like to share stories, but you got to stay focused, so keep it to 2 minutes, and then from there the interviewer will go back to you to see what aspects of that situation they can explore further. A couple of other tips, and Nick, feel free to jump in since you have done very many situational questions. there should be a balance between highlighting your individual achievements and what the group did. So when you're in a situational interview, we want to understand what were your individual contributions. So if you're telling me my team did this, my team did that, well, I'm not interviewing the entire team for this role, I'm interviewing you. And I think every good interviewer will kind of pause you and kind of remind you of that. So you can, and it's fine to give credit to other people. I've heard very many situations where the person I'm interviewing didn't start the action. They were alerted of a problem by somebody else, and it's fine. Like, to say the vice president of the chapter identified we had this particular issue, brought it to my attention, and from there, I really took it upon myself to investigate what had happened. I talked to these many people, and then you kind of break down the actions. Definitely do not embellish or exaggerate. I think every seasoned interviewer can figure that out. But those are my best practice tips for a situational interview. Nick, is there anything else that you would add about situational or behavioral interviews?
No, I think you cover the basic three types of behavior. I think, if you went to Google and you did a research, you did a search, you'll see tons, there's a couple sites that actually have all the different types of questions that you could potentially be asked. So I recommend, do the search, look at the questions that you could be asked, be able to answer these questions with personal experiences. And I think you'll definitely be better prepared into that for those kind of questions. Obviously you got to keep it professional. You want to avoid bringing in some of the personal stories, like stories with your girlfriend or your parents, things like that are or politics or religion, because those are kind of topics that are off the table. You definitely cannot bring those.
It's hard to relate them. I think at the heart of that, one of the most common examples that I receive in terms of teamwork or working issues with working with others is like, oh, I helped my roommate, resolve this fight with their boyfriend or girlfriend or significant other. And even though that may be very noble, it's very challenging to be able to map that to professional skill sets, which is really what you're being evaluated. Most companies evaluate you based on competencies, which are skills, or strengths based, right? What are those qualities that you tend to do better? So
Right.
when you share such a personal scenario, it's not that people feel uncomfortable, but it's just very hard to translate into professional or
What I would
workplace
say,
skill.
right. What I would say, as an interviewer, the typical things I look for is how are they able to break down a complex situation into something simple that is more manageable and multiple pieces, and bring then all these pieces together to provide the answer or the solution. Looking at your logical, at the candidate's logical way of thinking, right? How they can construct and put all these pieces in series and create a thoughtful process that makes sense. When I have a candidate that's jumping all over the place, well, if that's how they are, then imagine if I were to take this candidate into a project that I'm in and bring them into a client to explain something to them. We just can't have that, right? So we're looking at that, ability to put some logic and construct and process and order to complex and ambiguous situations, and how are these difficult situations being handled as well, personally and professionally. I think.
So and the second common mistake that I see with situational behavioral interviews is just staying at the surface. So when does that happen? Oh, I'm a great leader, I'm a great organizer, and we don't get to the punchline, right? So if you tell me you're a great organizer, that's amazing, but then show me how.
Right.
State what it is that you have a strength about, and then give me the example and the nature of the situation. And then the next thing that I will say about situational and behavioral interviews, but I think applies to all of our interviews is your listening skills. I know for us in consulting, that is actually our most important skill set. A consultant that doesn't listen to the clients is not a good thing, but in an interview is also equally as bad because you're never are going to get to the point. So in spite of the anxiety or the stress or whatever may be, take a moment to slow down and make sure that you truly understand what is at the heart of the question. And I think it's fine to say, oh, that is a great question. Can you give me do you mind if I take about 30 seconds to organize my thoughts, because I really want to make sure I give you a great example, and I have a couple. And I think every logical, I think, interviewers want to set up people for success, so they will allow you to do that. So it's okay to take a couple of seconds to compose. Obviously, don't be there 5 minutes, and not speaking and not communicating with your interviewer. But I think that is important. And the reason why I say that, Nick, you know where I'm going to go with this, is sometimes people are enamored of certain examples, and I don't want to take any credit away from it. Sometimes we do things and complete things that we're very proud of, but if it doesn't apply to the question that you're being asked, then it's not a good reflection on you, because part of the interview, I think, is showing that you're able to listen and follow instructions.
Right. And I think, in behavioral interviews, one aspect also about the interview is the interviewer will sometimes interrupt the candidate in the middle of the story and say, let's go back to something that you mentioned. I want to go in deeper into that. And then we'll ask you, well, what were you thinking? What did you do? What would you do differently? Right? What was the lesson learned? What was the outcome? What did the other person say? How did you react? How did you feel? And because those are called probing questions, because the interviewer may have caught on to something that, hey, this is interesting. This is answering the question that I need to be answered. I want to find out more to see if there's substance and essence in that situational that as an interviewer I can capture. And you know what? Close up that section of the interview. Let's move on to the next. Right? I've had actually interviewees, candidates that have answered all three questions that I would normally ask in the 30-minute interview with one scenario. And it was because it was such a comprehensive scenario that the person covered, learning something new, tackling a challenge with little direction and much ambiguity, and dealing with difficulty, right? And sometimes those are the best stories. As an interviewer, those are like the easy interviews, right? It's like, oh my God, check, everything's up. Let's now have a conversation, right? Sometimes that can happen. Be prepared to answer the three questions. Be prepared to be able to leverage different stories as well, and not have to use the same story 3 times. Because if the interviewer is asking you the second question, guess what? It's because they haven't gotten the answer in the first story you said. And if they're asking the third question, it's because they haven't received the answer yet. In some cases, you may have a great story to tell, but be cognizant that the interviewer will manage the interview, will interrupt you, will also stop you and say, you know what? I know you're not done with your story. I've captured everything I need to capture. Let's move on to the next question. And as a candidate and as an interviewer, I certainly say, well, I want to finish my story. This is what I'm passionate about. Well, guess what? Move on. You gotta.
They got everything they wanted about you. They want to explore a different side.
Right, and you gotta listen to the interviewer, right? You gotta listen to the interviewer and say, we're gonna move on, right? Don't say, well, let me finish my story. No, I've actually had candidates saying, I want to finish my story, so please listen to me. And I'm like, whoa, interesting. I didn't see this.
Well, you gotta be flexible and nimble in this world. You caught my attention to 2 things. I'm gonna kind of nerd out a little bit in HR. So when an interviewer is taking you, take me to the time, and they put you in a specific point in time, that is called the pit. And they want to put you in the pit for a reason. This is interviewing behavioral 101 basic methodology. They want to take you there because that's when they want to start the journey of the conversation, because that's where they are getting the sense that the richness of the details there. I think contrary to what most people think, the interviewers are not there to get you. The interviewers are there to help you and facilitate. And Nick mentioned something that is priceless. If an interviewer tells you something and you're like, well, what didn't we just talked about this or didn't hear that? It is not the interviewer. It is you, in the sense that there is something else that you need to elaborate more. It's not that they're not paying attention, it's just they want to go back to exploring something that maybe you didn't explore as much, or you gloss over, or there just wasn't an opportunity to talk about, and they want to learn more. And we tend to go to those pits where we feel there's rich examples of what we're looking for, because just in the same way the interview starts before you guys do, it also starts for the interviews before. We're reviewing your resumes, your credentials, their situations or skill sets that we may want to ask you. So yeah. Do we want to open up for any quick questions about screen or behavioral interviews before we proceed with the next type of interview? Dora, do we
Dora,
have
have
any
we seen any
questions
questions?
lined up?
We have a couple of questions, and we did have clarity out there. Someone posted what STAR actually stood for:
Thank you.
situation, task,
Task, that's the one that
action, result.
yeah, thank you.
No, thank you to Gustavo. Keep
Gracias,
laughing.
Gustavo.
The other two questions are just regarding the GPA. Does it go on the resume or not? It's confusing. Any suggestions
Well, yeah,
Ms.
so it
Estrada?
goes back to,
Rafael.
kind of putting my HR hat on. Every position has basic qualifications that it is the requirements that we need to consider that are critical to the position in terms of um, the qualifications. And I encourage each of you, when you're looking at the job description, just don't gloss it. Get organized. If you're interviewing with several companies, have an Excel with different tabs, put in the job description so you can come back to it, understand it, look at the basic qualifications. And if one of the basic qualifications is the GPA, follow the instructions. Very legally, there's very few exceptions that organizations can make. And different companies ask for different things. For some people, is the major GPA. For us at Accenture, for example, is overall GPA. I've seen transcripts that have 4 different GPAs. I didn't know that was possible, but there it is. So just read very carefully what it is, because sometimes the qualifications is for a full-time position. You need to have graduated by a certain date, because they need you to start by a certain time. So
All right,
other
so
questions?
shout out to Rafael Estrada for that question. This one is from Omar Cruz, and he's asking, would you suggest candidates take notes during the interview process?
For sure. I would encourage candidates to take notes and bring notes with them if the interview allows it, right? Because in case studies, you sometimes may not be able to bring notes, depending on the company, but I encourage them to bring notes because they may have the questions that they may want to ask the interviewer at the end. So make sure you have questions as well.
And I think that's part of your management of your own interview. I don't care what interview it is, you should always have questions prepared. And they're questions that should be very informed questions. So here's one of the questions that I hate the most that people ask me at job fairs. What do you guys do for chemical engineers? And the tone, the demeanor it's like shows no research, or so come with informed questions, right? Read the job description. It's not about looking for the most obscure data or factoid about an organization, but it could be maybe you're interested in artificial intelligence and you want to see how that's going to impact, I don't know, jobs in business or engineering? I mean, that is a question that generates discussion. And there are other questions that you should prepare to evaluate company culture. I am very passionate about telling the students that you need to ask, why is that person there in that organization working? After, if Nick says he's been working at Accenture for 22 years, you should be asking Nick, why is that, so you can learn about that organization. Experiential questions, right? In terms of, oh, you have a new CEO. It seems like everybody's excited. What are some of the things that you're looking for, right? And culture is such an important question, because when you look at it, we spend at least 8 hours a day at work. That is, the average work week for most companies is 40 hours. That's a lot. And then if you think about the time that you're sleeping, that doesn't leave you a lot of hours in the day. So you want to like who you're working with. And some examples of questions, I'm going to give you a couple of freebies here. And if you're interviewing with us, certainly you're welcome to ask these questions, because we want you to. Is if you are interested in a certain population, you want to understand if a company's how committed are they for Hispanic Americans. Ask them, well, can you tell me some of the programs to support the Hispanic American community and your Hispanic American employees at your organization? Tell me about your employees' resource groups. What maturity level is the organization in? Because I think you want to have a good understanding if they're still in the, we need diversity as a business rationale, or if they're past that with more mature programs, because that's going to affect your experience. So definitely be prepared with these questions. Like, my son is 16. He wants to study engineering, and I'm already kind of selling SHPE to him. And those are the questions that I will tell him to ask.
Fantastic. So, Ilenia, I want to go back to, kind of the presentation content, and we can keep on addressing questions towards the tail end.
Sure.
So we talked about, the behavioral interview, and, we didn't cover the screening interview, which is typically the screening interview, and I can cover this one. The screening interview is essentially a short interview where the interviewer and the candidate are having a conversation, trying to get an understanding of the background of the candidate. And typically it's, what the GPA requirement is, do they have any job experience, what kind of extracurricular activities they have, what's their professional presence, can they articulate, can they communicate well, do they have executive presence. Looking at, what in terms of extracurricular activities, also trying to see if they've had any leadership positions or community outreach or voluntary or membership or anything like that, to try to understand the well-roundedness of the individual. And then, kind of follow on, and that's kind of like the resume, the more live review of the resume interview. And then after that, it's more like an open conversation, trying to understand, why Accenture? Why are you interested in an opportunity at Accenture? What do you know about Accenture? What's your understanding of the type of work that we do, and things like that? And so you gotta be, you gotta make sure that if you're coming into a screening interview, you are prepared to talk about what the company does, whether it's Accenture, IBM, Deloitte, P&G, whatever it is. What are their basic services? What products do they have, sell? What is their business about?
The lifestyle of working in a certain industry, right?
Right. Trying to understand, are there any travel commitments? What's the amount of potential overtime, right? Some companies have really extensive travel commitments because they require you to have, be open to travel. Others are just, local job. Some companies are looking for an 8 to 5, type of person. Some companies may require you to work a little bit overtime, depending on the role, depending on the project. So there's definitely different kinds of conversations that you can have. Things that you may want to be aware is, what is their professional development agenda, right? How do they develop the skills of their people? How do they grow? What is the career growth? And sometimes a lot of that information is actually publicly available in the company's website. But if not, it's okay to say, what, I don't know, but what can you tell me about it? And it's a conversation that you're trying to have with the recruiter as part of what they call that screening interview or first interview. Anything
Yeah, and
you'd
I
like
think
to
it's
add, Ilenia?
okay, and I think it's okay to say this is kind of what I read, but can you tell me more? Like this seems really interesting, or I couldn't find enough information of a program.
Right.
All right, Nick, should
I'll,
we move into case interviews?
Yeah, so, well, before we move into case, so we talked about screening, we talked about behavioral. There's also a couple other interviews which are really easy to explain, right? And they're called group interviews, right? And group interviews could be the one candidate with two or three interviewers, or it could be three or four candidates with one interviewer or a group of interviewers. And that's what they call group interviews. It could be a behavioral focus, it could be a case study focus type of interview, but it'll be the setting and how the interview is being handled. And sometimes recruiters, what they're trying to look is, if it's a group interview where it's you and other candidates, they're trying to see how you're going to interact with other people that you may not know, how the four of you integrate into a team to come up with and respond to the answer. So there's may be different dynamics that the interviewer would be looking for in the candidates themselves. The other types of interviews are marathon interviews, right? Where it's a full day of interviews, back to back to back. You come in at 8 a.m. and you're interviewing back to back. You may have 5 interviews in a day. An office visit is also a type of interview, right? Where a company invites you to come to their headquarters or to an office of, you may decide to work in Chicago or in San Francisco, and the company has offices there. They'll invite you to that location to get to know the people that are working out of that office. And you may have some sessions in the morning, maybe some interviews. You'll go out to lunch with a couple of executives, and then the later part of the afternoon, it may be kind of the roundup and wrapping up of the day, where you may talk to a much higher level, executive that is kind of making the final decision and approval of making sure that they might be extending you an offer or not. So those are additional types of interviews. Now, let's move on to the case interview, right?
Actually, do you mind if we cover really quickly digital or virtual reality interviews, and then we can spend more time on the case because I think
Yes.
are more elaborate. So you will start, if you haven't already, seeing a way of digital online assessments that are part of the process. And then they tend to take 45 to 60 minutes. They tend to be very tailored to each organization in terms of the content and you're answering questions about scenarios that they're giving you that are obviously critical to the role, and then responding to those. They can come in the form of just kind of answering just questions, like we did with the poll, but they can also include videos. So there's a little bit of kind of you being able to process data and information and kind of answer questions about those. Or it could be scenarios where you have debriefs or memos and then you're kind of reading them. Or they may show you an informational video about the organization and then you're reacting to the concepts, right? Whether it's a methodology or a technology about it. So those are more and more common. And then the last ones that I will mention are virtual reality assessments. They tend to be, really cool, because who doesn't like to be with, have a virtual reality experience? When you are doing a virtual reality experience, it tends to be like a strengths-based assessment again. So not exactly what you did, but sort of where are your strengths and how position are you to be successful in a certain number of areas. So I kind of think about it a little bit as some of the university admissions kind of process, right? If you're going to study engineering in the past, probably 15, 20 years ago, when Nick and I were being considered for college, and that's an understatement, they were looking for just the best rock star, right? And now they've moved into, you want to study engineering, so they're going to look, okay, how did you do in your STEM courses? And did you challenge yourself academically in the STEM courses? So that's kind of more strengths-based. And in a virtual reality assessment, what you can expect is that every virtual reality experience, so you have the headset, you have the controllers, and you're welcome in some sort of lobby, and that's kind of where you practice, right? If you, I mean, for those of you gamers, that won't be an issue, but if you're not experienced in that, that gives you practice time, and then you're introduced on how you're going to navigate in the different environments, and that's what they call the different scenarios. I think most virtual reality assessments have 2 to 3 different scenarios, and again, they're looking for a variety of skill sets like analytical skills, organizational skills, flexibility, agility, etc. So I would expect that there will be a lot more of those coming up in this year or the next.
Changing
And then
times indeed.
yeah, exciting times indeed. So let's talk about case interviews, and
Ooh,
I'll give
my
the
favorite.
introduction. Yeah, I'll give the introduction, and then Nick can kind of start getting into the details. So, uh, all the consulting companies pretty much do case interviews, and a lot of the technology and startup companies use case elements. And what do I mean? A case interview, which is if it's full blown, you will be given a problem in 1 or 2 pages, and it will be a scenario that will be simulating something that someone in that job or in that industry could experience. So, for example, the cases that we do at Accenture tend to be based on actual client experiences, and they have multiple layers of situations. There could be a production issue in terms of capacity. There could be a technology upgrade that is being scheduled when this needs to happen. There could be operational costs or challenges. Maybe there is a cash flow situation in the organization, right? When we look at challenges that organizations have, it's very rare to find a problem in a silo. It's going to affect a number of things: people, processes, um, sometimes operational models in an organization, production. So we try to simulate that. In terms of the case elements, they come in different variations. So this is how you will know if you have one. So it could be a brain teaser. So, for example, how many gumballs can you fit in in a Fiat, for example? Or a case element question could be, can you tell me if for the city of Dallas, how many? I'm going to use a client of Accenture, Uber. How many vehicles, for Uber are circulating between 5 to 6:30 p.m. And then you have to do a calculation. And I think what all of these questions have in common is that you are presented with a problem that you need to provide a methodical approach to tackle and break down the problem. And the difference between cases is that if you read the case literature, there are 18 different frameworks to solve the cases. Now, you do not need to know 18 frameworks. I don't know 18 frameworks. That's crazy, unless you're going to write a book about case interviews. That's the only time you will need to know 18 frameworks. I will pick 3 or 4, and the most common ones tend to be one, the issue tree, which you all use, and you probably don't know what's called an issue tree. So it's basically when you break down one issue, sub issues, and then the different elements of that sub issue. That is an issue tree. The other one is a profitability model, right? How are you doing in terms of your costs and your revenues, and are you making money? Do you understand variable costs? Things like that. And then the 4 Ps, which is priced, product. I forget all the Ps. I know it could be 4 or 5 Ps, and when there's 5 Ps, the fifth P is people. And I think there is one more, but at least those three should carry you through most. And the key, before I pass it on to Nick, is that a case interview and the preparation for it is not a mental exercise. I think it's fine to digest the frameworks, understand it, read about, okay, how do I transition? But this is really like learning to swim or ride a bike. Until you don't jump in the water, until you don't jump into that bike, you're not going to be able to do it, because the most challenging aspect of a case is actually managing your interview. And knowing kind of how to note take, synthesize information, keep track of things, your hypotheses, and your solutions. So, Nick, I'm going to pass it on to you. And do we want to start with, kind of expectations of how the breakdown of time happens in an interview, so at least the students understand
Right.
that as
Well,
we're.
one thing I want to cover also a little bit about the case, because cases are typically the make it or break it of the whole recruiting process, right? It's
There's a heart
typically where you
interviews.
see the biggest fallout in terms of number of candidates that unfortunately don't make it onto the next stage. And I would say, key elements of the case, like you said, you're presented with a problem statement. It's typically written, sometimes it's narrated. From an interviewer perspective, the key things that you're looking for is, that an interviewer is looking for, is making sure you understand what the problem is, right? Now, the case may have one problem or it may have 10. And I always say, you know what? Try to identify all the problems, list them out as you're reading them or as you are listening to them, write it down. And then, once it's done, take some time to digest it. Say, you know what, I tell the interviewer, can I take a few minutes to go through, my notes, through what you said, through, the narrative or whatever it is, to formulate, an approach, and then we can engage in a conversation. And then, key thing is, you're going to probably find a case study that's going to have like 10 different issues. Now, are you supposed to solve all 10 issues or not? Probably not, because you only have 30 minutes, right? So the key thing is, I would say, identify the top 1 or 2 issues. I would say 2 or 3 issues that you've seen in the case study. And then maybe tell the interviewer, say, look, I'm going to focus on these 2 or 3 issues because based on our experience, this is what's going to give you the biggest bang for the buck or the biggest benefit, or, it's going to be the 20-80, right? It's the 20% of the issues that are going to give you the 80% of the improvement. And then,
Nick,
focus
I
on
think one important part that we forgot to mention about cases is that there's a role play element in
Yes.
all cases. So if you're the interviewer, most likely is going to portray and role play a SME, a subject matter expert. And then that has some information. You have to validate things, socialize ideas or hypotheses. And if for you, the person being interviewed, you're playing the employee part of that organization. So for us, since we're a consulting company, then you will be role playing the consultant.
Right. And yes, keep that in mind. And obviously, as you're approaching the problem, leverage the frameworks that Ilenia mentioned, whether you want to use an issue tree or a decision tree or a profitability or the 5 Ps, draw it out on a piece of paper. And then once you kind of like put your thoughts together, you can go back to the interviewer and then walk them through what you just formulated and have a conversation, right? Because what's going to happen is as you're having this conversation, the interviewer will throw nuggets of information back at you that will change now your approach. And now you may have to adapt right there on the spot based on the additional information that they've given you. You can potentially ask them for more information and say, you know what, you've given me these 3 or 4 pieces, but I feel like I'm missing this. Would you be able to tell me why is this or why X or why Y? And they'll be able to open up and give you some information. Some interviewers will say, you know what, the information I'm giving you is more than enough, because guess
or
what?
They will say, I don't know. Or they will
Right.
say, I don't know.
Right, and because that sometimes happens in reality, right? You're in front of a client having these conversations, and you have to listen to what they say. So if they tell you something is not important, don't keep on honing that, but this is important. No, listen to the client, right? Listen to the interviewer, who in this particular case. Now, one thing that I also see very powerful in kind of wrapping up the interview is you've presented the solution, now what, right? And you're still in a role-playing mode, right? What I encourage you to do is, if you're interviewing with company X or Y and you understand what services that company provides, bring that knowledge to the interview and say, you know what? We can help, and the interviewer, keep in mind, the interviewer is your client. You can tell the client, you know what? Being part of ABC company, We work on data center consolidation, and we can help you with this problem that you have, that where you need to bring these 5 or 6 data centers into 1 or 2, right? And with our expertise in infrastructure outsourcing, we can take over and help you run your data centers for you. That's a very powerful message for the interview, because you just told them how to solve the problem, and you just sold them on the fact that you know what the company does. And that's extremely powerful.
And you can bring your personal experiences into that. Nick, we have like 2.5 minutes left. So the last thing that I wanted to say is focusing and answering the main questions. If you have any additional innovative ideas, answer first the question and the key issues. And then, like Nick said, in addition, I have some additional suggestions that I would like to throw in, particularly things that are out of the box. And I've seen examples that were not going very well, and they get turned around with that. Anything that we want to recap, Nick, before we wrap things up in terms of all the interviews or the case interviews?
So what I would say is a couple things to keep in mind. One, the interview is a conversation you're having with the interviewer. As a candidate, you know best yourself. So if they're going to ask you questions about yourself, and you should be able to answer those really easily. They're not going to ask you anything that you wouldn't know. I would say relax, breathe. Breathing relaxes you. Breathing calms those butterflies, that uncertainty that you will have, that nervousness that you may have at the interview. At the end of the day, it's just a conversation. And last but not least, practice. You have to practice. I cannot tell you this, there's multiple resources, whether it's through university, through SHPE, through, companies coming out to do mock interviews. Take advantage of those opportunities, because the more you practice, the better you'll be, and the easier these interviews will come in. Because if you go cold turkey into an interview and you've never done it before, believe me, you have everything going against you. There's no guarantee that that you'll fail, but the chances are going to be much higher that you may not be successful because you haven't practiced.
So I'll give a tip, and then I'll pass it on to Leticia, who actually, we have not given her a chance to say anything. So Leticia, start collecting your quick tips. I would say be yourself and show your personality. I don't think companies anymore wants to hire robots or people that are exactly the same. And most, companies will welcome a spectrum from social introverts to extremely extroverted people. We don't hire cookie cutter people anymore. So when you're interacting, be authentic, show your personality and your authenticity. And Leticia, I'll pass it on to you, and you'll have the last words to close.
Thank you, Ilenia. Just to kind of wrap up, going back to the whole case interview, and I know Nick and Ilenia touched a little bit on this, but I think it's very important for you guys to not only practice, but time yourselves. I think with case interviews, a lot of candidates get very nervous, and there's only 30 minutes there, but just practicing the case, kind of reviewing it, have a buddy. I know Accenture is really good about assigning a buddy to you that you can practice, and someone that can give you more guidance, but kind of just leveraging those resources, and then kind of getting to know anyone that's been through the process at Accenture and kind of learning from them on their experience, and then leveraging their network for you to kind of prepare as best as you can for that case interview.
So time management for the interview. Some case interviews are 30 to 60 minutes, and leverage your resources. So we'll leave you with those thoughts. Dora, we're going to pass it. Oh, sorry.
One quick thing. So we'll try to address any questions, or maybe Dora will try to wrap it up. But I welcome everyone. Feel free to look us up on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, and I always welcome when people reach out. They have questions, regarding recruiting, interviews, how to approach recruiters and all that. Feel free to reach out. We're here to help out. We feel most empowered when we're actually helping you be successful, because if you're prepared for the interview, it makes our interviews easier.
Okay.
Back to you, Dora.
And have fun in the interviews.
Okay, well, there you go, Ship Familia. Please join me in thanking the Accenture team. Bravo, un mil gracias. Excellent tips for our members. Ship Familia, please remember to take our survey. You will receive a thank you email with a survey link after the webinar. We need your constructive feedback to make this program the best it can be. We hope to see you September 11th for our webinar number 10, Dress for Success. I'm excited to share that we've added these videos to our ship.org website in the Programs tab to find the latinXfactor webinars. Signing off from Ship National, buenas noches, Ship Familia.
Have a good night.